So this project is kind of like taken us all over the place. It has grown, and I think the reason it has been so successful is that everyone has a story of work. Everyone can play, if you will. Whether you're a homemaker, a doctor, a logger, a storekeeper, a librarian, you have a story to tell about the work in your life. And this is the kind of project I love for that reason. There's no, only so-and-so can tell a story. No, everyone has a story to share with us. And in this context, we're interested in stories not just about your own life, but about members of your family, maybe someone from your community who really stands out to you. So, we're starting the evening with Christine LaRock, who, as you all know if you live here, is the librarian here. And we kind of twisted her arm a little, but this is a woman who's lived here her whole life. If she doesn't have a story to tell about work, it sort of drops the credentials for all of us telling stories about work. So, you know, you kind of got to do it. So please join me in welcoming Christine LaRock to kick off the evening.
I will tell you, there's an exit there. This is the legal stuff. Exit back there, exit here, and around the corner is the bathroom. And these guys have been wonderful to work with. This is their third event here, and I think what I think is the important part of what they're doing is they're also showing that local people, all the work that they do is great. I mean, she mentioned from being a housekeeper to whatever. In my family, we were miners at Tahaz and also loggers. Pretty much the things that you might expect. My grandfather he guided the rich folks, we called them, who came up and he'd shoot the deer, pack it on their car, and they'd bring it home. And then of course they'd say, well, I got this nice deer. And you know, he didn't care because he got paid, that was the way he made money. But this story is about my grandfather. He was born in Minerva, but the family lived in Newcomb. They were a bunch of Irish people. His name was George Shaughnessy, and my mom was Pat Shaughnessy. She married a Frenchman, much to their chagrin. So my name is LaRock. So he was part of he did some logging. Pretty much they did whatever they had to, but for a short time, he was a fire tower ranger at Goodnoe Mountain. And he worked there probably about 7 years. But he worked there 2 years, and you go up in the summer and look for the fire, you know, if you see any sign of fire, and then you radio it down. It was kind of boring, but he did his things. He always had little chipmunks going in his pocket and cool stuff, which he did right to the end of his life. Not on top of the mountain, though. So he'd go up every day and go back down to Kate Flynn's house, who was his mother, Kate Flynn Shaughnessy, and she allowed no drinking. That's just an aside, but they all drank a lot. They were Irish. But, so one summer, a woman was visiting. Her name was Gladys Shaughnessy. She was a German woman who was from Schenectady, New York, and she also did modeling, which sounds really elegant, but back in the day, stores hired women to just dress up and in their clothing, and then people could see what it looked like. And she loved that. She was quite the clothes horse. And her sister, though, lived at the Goodnoe Flow. Her name was Tink. She was my great aunt. And she was a great hunter. So in her cabin, to this day, there's a whole bunch of deer, and people would always walk and say, hey, whoa, those are nice deer you got. I said, nope, those are Tinks. But she loved animals, but she did shoot, and she did, they did eat the meat. Anyway, she brought her sister up here, and my grandmother was not happy. She was like, what? This is a cabin? Probably, you know, outdoor bathroom. She said, well, Gladys, we're going to go climb Goodnoe Mountain. I think it'll be fun for you. So Gladys went, got a really nice skirt on. She got her heels, and she hiked up Goodnoe. Probably got at the top and looked absolutely fabulous. Fabulous enough that George Shaughnessy was smitten. And he looked at her and he was like, whoa. home and on. Gladys stayed with Tink. She must have been pretty smitten too. And he would hike down to go see her and then go back up. After about 2 weeks of that, he said, you know what? I ain't doing this no more. He said, either you marry me or we're done. So within a month, they were married. And sure enough, she did live up there with them. My mother lived her first 5 years up there. They had her in just summers, and then it got to be the point where they had more. They were starting to have more children, so he couldn't afford to be a fire tower ranger anymore because it was seasonal, and that's when he got into logging. But what the beautiful part was, my grandfather died in like '89, I think, 92, and Gladys had died at least 10 years earlier. But I saw him on his anniversary, what would have been his 60th anniversary, and he was sort of looking, and I was like, what? We called him Grandpa George. I said, Grandpa George, what are you thinking about? I didn't even know it was his anniversary. He said, I remember that day I met Gladys. And so, and it was, you know, that was his work, and that's our thing. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. I have a feeling we just barely skimmed the top of what we need to talk to you about for the archive. Some folks coming in. There's a chair over here and maybe a couple over there. So come on in if you can. All right. We are going next, a little bit out of order here because Helen Kentile, did I say your right name?
Yes.
Your name correctly, Helen?
Yes.
Helen has come to tell a story and she needs to leave. She may not be able to stay for the whole evening, so we're kind of tucking Helen in right now, and I have no idea what her story is about, so let's all find out. Come on up, Helen.
Well, I have lots of stories, but I was born here, raised here, have lived here all but 15 years of my life in the home that my grandparents owned on Rice Road. So I've spent most of my time here. But the story I'm going to tell you about is actually about my great-grandfather. They came here in the 1880s. He was a very tall, handsome Canadian. He was one of 6 brothers, all very tall and all very handsome, and at one point we did go to above Cornwall and find his father's grave and took pictures. We have pictures of the whole family. But my grandfather took a bride. Her name was Grace. She was 14 years old, and in those years they married young. They had 5 children. My grandmother being one of them, Elizabeth Rice, and that's the home that we own, she and her husband, Arthur. But my great-grandfather was not literate. He could not read. He could sign his name, and that's all he could do. But he was a stonemason extraordinaire. And the reason I want to tell you this is that he was a great part of the Bog River Falls Bridge. I have pictures of him building that bridge. He was a great part of Great Stone Camp. I don't know if you know that, it's owned by Julie Helms and her family. And he was a great part of the wall that you see going out of Long Lake next to Rice Road. So he was a very talented man. He was also a very stubborn man. And I don't know how many of you know where Clement Road is, but their house was at the top of the hill. Bunny Austin owns it now. And his wife, my great-grandmother, liked to be social. He, not so much. But she would pack up her things in the evening, and they had a son, Ged, who owned the hotel. And they would walk from the top of Clement Hill down to the hotel and visit on the porch, and then they would walk back up the hill. And they did that almost nightly. And I thought, you must really want to visit when you, and she was about, I don't think she was 5 feet tall. She was as tall as round as she was tall. But she was a sweetie. and my mother has told me so many times, she was a seamstress, and she made all their clothes. My mother and my aunt and everyone got her clothes and hand-me-downs, and she just made them all over. He lived to be about close to 90. He died in 1958. I was in nursing school when he died. He lived with my grandmother in the house that I live in now. She took care of him. His wife predeceased him by not many years, 2 or 3 years. She died at Mercy Hospital in Tupper Lake. Their children all were very literate. My uncle was one of the big executives for GE and lived in Michigan. My Uncle Gad, great uncle, was an owner of the hotel and many businesses around town. He owned the campground where Haas's campground is now. He developed that. And my grandmother was just a sweetie, and she worked for a lot of people. I don't know if the name NS means anything to anybody around here. I don't know. There's people that bought the NS camp. She was their cook, and she cooked for them in Jersey City. And in the summer, they would bring her up here with them, and she would live in our house, and she would walk. And I don't know if you know where NS's is, but it's where the art camp is now. And that's quite a walk. And she would walk from our house to that house to cook. And once in a while she'd get a ride back home, but generally she walked. So they were hardworking people, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud to be a Long Laker. I have deep roots. I don't think I'm going to go anywhere right away, but I have lots of stories, but that's just one. I just thought the Bog River and the Great Stone construction would be interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helen. You know, hearing Helen's story about her great-grandfather, who was one great-grandfather who was a stonemason, I flash on some of the quarries we've been taking pictures of. Across the region, there were some extraordinary stone quarries. But the other half of your story about the young woman cooking for someone else reminds me that when Amy and I started this project, and I should tell you that Amy Feiereisel is really the project coordinator, and Claire Mendes is the outreach coordinator. And when Amy and I got started with this project, we made a commitment to find photographs of women working, because women's work until very recently was not really documented. So we have a few pictures, for example, of women standing outside of kitchens at hotels or large homes, and they were taking a break from cooking or cleaning, or we have women feeding chickens in the front yard. But women's work was not documented nearly as well as men's work, and yet, what's the old saying? Men may work from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. Amen. Okay, enough preaching, Ellen. Our next storyteller is Louisa Wright. Louisa here? Yeah. Oh, there you are. I thought you'd run away. Come on up. Don't be shy. Remember, we're talking about work tonight, work you've done, or work people in your family or community have done. Come on, Louisa.
I'm Louisa Austin Wright.
Oh, we gotta get you closer to the mic. That's good. Stay right close to it.
She's at least 5'4".
I'm 4'11". I have long arms.
That should get it a little bit closer to it.
I am a sixth-generation Long Laker. Grew up here along with my family, great-grandparents, and back to the first 6 settlers in Long Lake. So I think I can call myself a native, but I pride myself on that. Growing up here was quite an experience, as many of you know that grew up here. Quite a bit different than from our ancestors. But just to give a little oversight of the women and the family, what they did we were basically guides and guideboat builders. We have 5 generations of guideboat builders, the Austin family, and guides. My great-great-grandfather Farron was a major guide with Mitchell Spatus, and as Christine said, they would take the sports, as they called them, into the woods and shoot their deer for them, pack them into the guideboats, and paddle them up the lake or down the lake. And my uncle has a lot of stories from that generation, because he obviously was a lot closer to that age. But they were also were masons, they were carpenters. My great-great-grandfather built the great stone gate down the end of Walker Road, and also built the post office, which the old post office, it looks a little different now than it does now. But we also were lumberjacks. They were in the woods, and my mom actually was a cook in the lumber camp in the I don't know, 50s, and that's where she met my father. She was cooking probably I don't know how many dozens, 12 dozen eggs a morning for the lumberjacks. And supposedly I was conceived in the lumber camp. That's my...
You got hot in the kitchen.
But I grew up here, but I left after high school, like many of us did, to go to college, to find our way in the world, where we thought Long Lake was the last place we wanted to live. But after I left, I could think about nothing more than coming back. And I did, and I will not leave, but I am trying to run a business now. I have Incapaco Art Song Studio, and have had that for 7 years, teaching and selling things at the art shop. But it's a tough way to make a living in Long Lake. But so one funny thing about having the store is, not to offend anyone, but many people come in the summer and they're just so praiseworthy of my shop and how beautiful it is and how wonderful my art is, and I'm very thankful for that. And they're saying, so it must be tough living here all year in the winter. And I said, yes, but I love it, and that's when I get my work done for the summer. And they just, oh, this is just so wonderful. It must be just so fabulous to live here. I said, yes, it is. And how do you survive? How do you make a living? I said, well, it's tough. I mean, you know, selling art and art supplies and teaching, it's not a great income, but it's what I love. And they said, well, you are just so blessed, and I'm just so happy you're here. And I hope you make it next year. I hope I see you next year. And good luck, good luck. I heard that many times, and now I just shrug. It's like, oh well, but that's what we deal with. But I'm just thankful for this place and this opportunity to live here, and for how hard my mother worked as a cook, as a cleaner. I cleaned camps, I took care of kids, I did everything I could to stay here. And that's what a few people call the Adirondack trickle, is that you do whatever you can and for anyone to be able to make a living here.
They have a fancy name for it now. They call it the gig economy. It's been here a long time before that.
Well, I have a lot of gigs. Well, thank you.
We actually have a project where we've been sort of working on preliminary work on at the radio station to kind of track that. You know, we've called it all different names. We call it the gig economy, we call it the trick. That's a new one. I hadn't heard that expression. We call it the piece it together work, you know. And I don't think there's anyone who's lived here who hasn't done that for at least part of their lives. Piece together a livelihood one way or the other. Yeah. So thank you so much. So we're going to go next to my old friend David Carson here in the front row.
You're above.
We used to have a joke in college about, I'm unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, my next speech will be in Omaha. And I never understood that joke. And some people thought it was hilariously funny, but not I. What I'm going to talk to you about is a slight disaster we had in the business we once owned here. Lucy and I bought the theater in Indian Lake in 1984 and fixed it up and sold it at the end of 1999. So we had it for 15 years, and I wanted to tell a little story about a kind of disaster we had. First, I have to tell you some technical information. When we bought the theater, it had the usual arrangement of 2 projectors. The film was on reels of about 2,000 feet each, and these ran for about 20 minutes, and so you'd switch back and forth between projectors to give the audience the impression that it was one continuous movie. Well, during the 60s, I guess it was, a new type of film handling system was developed in which there were large platters, about 4 feet in diameter, made out of aluminum. They were stacked, 3 of them, and the film was all put together using a Scotch tape-like material into one continuous piece. So the film, if it came in on 6 shipping reels of 2,000 feet each, you'd have like 12,000 feet of film, I guess, right? Anyway, we were showing at that time movies for the Art Center in Blue Mountain Lake, and these were just a single show. And we had the Red Shoes one time. And at the end of the show, I had to take the film off of this mechanism with the big platters and put it back on the shipping reels. So, not thinking about what I was doing, I took the ring out of the center of the film. Now, the ring was what you wound the film up on, and if you were going to show it again, that ring had to come off. But if you were going to take the film off and put it back on the reels, you needed to leave the ring in there, because otherwise there was nothing to hold the film on the platter. So I said, uh-oh. And I thought, well, I'll try taking the film off, because I couldn't put the ring back in. It would not possibly do that. Anyway, it went pretty well for the first 3 reels. And that's about 6,000 feet, a little over a mile of film. And then on the 4th reel, the film gradually started to slide off. Now this is like 6,000 feet of film. And it ended up on the floor. And I thought, oh God. And Lucy was there with me, and we managed to get the whole thing straightened out, but it took us from about 9:30 in the evening until 1 o'clock in the morning to do it. And needless to say, I never made that error again. So anyhow, we had a great fun running the theater, and that was the only really big disaster we ever had. Thanks.
So how much did popcorn cost back then? Do you remember? You know, as many of you know, in recent years, movie theaters have by and large had to go HD, and there was a lot of community work across the region to bring remaining movie theaters up to speed in terms of HD technology. In movie theaters and bowling alleys, Claire and I talk a lot about bowling alleys. These are like places that people gather. I mean, they still have meaning where they exist. They're places for people to have fun and gather. It's not all work, but I'm going to tell you our next project. People keep telling us, you know, all work and no play. So our next project is going to be North Country at Play. That's somewhere way down the road, though. We got a lot of work here. I think it's really appropriate right now to inject a little bit of story of my own, because David, in some sense, played a role in it. What David didn't tell you is that before he came here, you were a engineer. Is that the right word? Engineer for GE? No. Bell Laboratories. And he's like a radio guy and a sound guy. So back in the early days of the station, until about 82, 83, we signed on the air 50 years ago, 1968, and I was brought on board in 1980 to help kind of point the station out to the public. We were primarily serving just a portion of St. Lawrence County. And Radio Bob Sauter joined us around the same time, and he came to me one day and he said, Ellen, you know, if we increased our power in Canton, we could actually do repeater stations. You know, we could do one in Saranac Lake and maybe a couple being the operative word, a couple of other places, you know. We now have 34 transmitters serving a third of New York State plus northwestern Vermont and parts of southeastern Ontario. But we kind of created this system by the seat of our pants. Often Radio Bob would, he's quite a serious engineer, very creative. He built some of our transmitters literally out of baling twine and spit, it seemed like sometimes. And we would, because there was so much terrain and such difficult terrain in the winter, and of course transmitters seem to only break down in the middle of the winter, we had friends at each transmitter location who Bob could call and say, hey, could you check this or could you check that? And I'm going to tell you that David was our guy in Long Lake. But let me back it up in Long Lake just a little bit before that, when we were looking for a location for a repeater in Long Lake. And Bob stopped in where you kind of check in, at least in those days, if you wanted to do anything in Long Lake, at Hosley's, right? And he talked to John Haas, and who said to him, oh yeah, we've got a thing up on the mountain for television. We want anything we can get in this town. You know, we'll give you space up there if you need it. Bob said, great. And he said, now, it's an antenna that's going to have to go on your little tower up there. But we also have this little box. It's called a translator. We need some protection for it. And John said, oh, we got a thing up there. You can put your thing in there. We got a little, you know, building for this up there. So Bob says, great. Up he goes, climbs the hill, and discovers it's a refrigerator in the building. Okay? By the way, we are definitely leaving this photograph for Christine. It should definitely be part of the permanent collection in Long Lake. So, Bob's a, you know, kind of can-do guy. He gets our translator in there, and the following summer, he arranged to make an improvement on the facility. He added screening along the bottom for ventilation. And then a few years after that, we built a shack up there to house not only our equipment, but other equipment the village needed. So, but this photograph, by the way, has this story, by the way, I should say, not the photograph necessarily, but the story is known across the public radio system. That North Country Public Radio had one of its transmitters in a refrigerator. You're famous. You're famous nationally, folks. All right. On to serious business. So up next, we have Donna Adams. Oh, I only got half of your name, Donna, and I bought sheep from you at one point, didn't I?
Yes.
Where are you, Donna? Are you going to come up and tell a story? Yeah. Yeah, I also ran a sheep farm for many years. That's different work. Welcome, Donna Adams.
Hi. I own Mountain View Farm up on the back hill on Kickerville Road, and we've been here.
A
Enough?
little closer to the mic.
We've been here for 38 years. We vacationed here 18 years before that, and we decided to leave Long Island and all the rush and hustle and bustle and move to Long Lake, and we've been here ever since, and we're very happy here. We've started our own businesses because living in the North Country, that's what you have to do. So being that Bob was a builder, whenever he got the urge to build, he'd put one of the boys in the log truck, which he did logging, and then build a new building. So he decided, I had a B&B for 17 years. And he decided if the B&B is working that well, we should have cabins and a motel. Well, I don't know if I want a motel, but he built a 6-unit motel. And we were very busy, winter and summer. In the summer, we had horseback riding and trail rides, and I imported the girl students to do trail rides for me, and we taught them the trails. And in the wintertime, we had snowmobiling. This one winter, I think it was snowmobile weekend of '95, we were packed. Town was packed. And these 2 guys called and they said that they needed a last-minute room. Did I have anything? And I had a cancellation. I said, I only have a queen-size bed. And they said, that's all right, we'll take it. One of us will sleep on the floor. Okay, so they took the room. In the morning, when the girls went to clean the motel, when all the guys left to go to the snowmobile races, I got a phone call. You better get down here right away. So I go to the motel. And of course, 2 guys being 2 guys and from the city and doing whatever they did, I have no idea, but they wrecked the room. So I called the troopers. We didn't touch anything. And there was this big bag of pot on the sink. So I'm like, don't touch it. I called the troopers. There's no troopers available. So they send a DEC officer and a ranger. By the time the DEC officer and the ranger got there, there was troopers everywhere because they radioed it in. So they all put their cars elsewhere and around, and they waited. We all waited. And pretty soon these guys came back. 2 guys, the snowmobile trailer was parked over on the side in their car, and they come up with the snowmobiles and they pull around like they're going to turn around and leave as soon as they see the first trooper. And of course, behind them is the DEC and the ranger. They went through the woods and stood behind them so they couldn't leave. So they decided it wasn't theirs. We planted it there. So by the time the troopers made them open their jackets, they had all kinds of pockets in their jackets with all these bags that they had been over town trying to sell. And the troopers said, well, you know what's happening here? So they checked the registration in the car. There's no registration in the car. No insurance on the car. No registration on the trailer. No registration on any snowmobile. And the next thing I knew, there was a bunch of trailers and trucks and snowmobilers and everything transporting these guys away. They paid restitution for the room because the troopers insisted right there. They gave me their credit cards. They paid restitution, and I never heard from them again. And that's my big-time winter story.
I'm not going to say anything about pot. I'm not going to say a word. Isn't it almost legal in New York State? Like, sort of get in there?
Another week.
the women and children would come up, and then in wealthier families, and the men would come up on weekends, right? That was kind of the pattern, wasn't it? And there was 2 months in the summer, and then there'd be a big gap, and then maybe there'd be some winter skiing in winter. But have you found, just really, for those of you who live, have you found that there is a more continuous economy than there used to be, or no, not really? It's still kind of 2 serious months in the summer and a little bit in the winter kind of thing? Okay, just curious. Okay, Jen Signal. Jen, is Jen here? Come on up. Did I say your name right?
Do you mind if I run and get my kids quickly because they wanted to hear?
Okay, I'll get someone else to tell then while you do that.
They're right out of.
That's fine. All right, well, you do that, and then bring them back in, and because I kind of shushed them before. You know, you get to be a certain age, and you just really don't give a damn what anyone thinks. Right? Yeah? Sorry. I was much more polite when I was younger. Well, there are some people here who knew me when I was younger. Maybe they don't agree. It seems that way. So, just for a show of hands, who here considers themselves year-round? And the rest of you are visiting for, say, a week or less? Anyone here a week or less? Okay, so you're just kind of passing through. Have you been here before?
Oh, yeah.
No, you have, because your parents are sitting right here. I know you have. But this couple here, this is your first time in Long, and
Yeah.
look what you found.
I know.
Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. You never know what you'll find the next time you come back to Long Lake. Should I get a little commission? Okay, and how many of you are here for come back summer after summer after summer kind of thing? Yeah. That's pretty typical of the region.
Come
Yeah,
all year.
that's pretty typical. Did you say, how about me?
No, I said
Oh.
come like all year, sporadically.
Oh, so you're here not just in the summer. You come whenever you can get.
When
Where are
you're
you based when you're not here?
We're from Johnstown, down by the Sacandaga.
Yeah. Well, so not that far.
2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
I wonder what Christmas is like here for locals. I mean, they have family, but it's got to be sort of small and quiet.
It's pretty
I'm
beautiful.
sure.
It's
Yeah.
pretty spectacular, actually. I can't think of a prettier place to be than in the Adirondacks in the North
Come up in
Country
January.
during
for
the
North
holidays.
Country. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really fabulous. Okay, here are those little rascals. Come on in, rascals. All right, Mom.
Oh, you're ready for me?
We are ready for you. We got the whole family here now.
Okay, well, I'm a little.
You'll do fine. Just fine, James. You know, I talked to you when we were here before. Yeah, you have a really important story.
Big round of applause because I really
This is
twisted
Jen
Jen's arm.
Siegman.
Okay, I'm a little bit nervous, but I'll try. A couple months ago, I heard on the radio that if I happened to be in Long Lake, I could come down and see what was happening at the library, so I did. And after I found out and saw some of these pictures, they asked me what I did for work. And I said, because it was in the middle of my busiest time, I said, I'm a cleaning lady. And they said, oh, we really want to hear from a cleaning lady. So here I am. And as far as cleaning lady stories, there are a lot I'm finding as I'm thinking in my head, and I have a story about a dead mouse, and I have a story about a hat that I told my kids, and I was thinking earlier today, you know, what makes a good story, and usually what makes a good story is probably not a dead mouse or a hat, but people and strangers coming to town. And I thought the perfect cleaning story happened to me last summer. I'll back up a little. For about 5 years, I have 3 children, 2 of them are here, 1 is not, this is a friend. And we have lived most of our time with their dad, who is a caretaker, about an hour into the woods from here. And because of that connection, over the last 5 years, I've been in the right place at the right time, and people have said, do you know anyone that does cleaning? And finally I said, yes, okay, and I agreed, and I picked up more and more jobs. Now there's this one family, and they come from the Midwest, and they come not every year, but maybe every other year, and it's a big production because this is a long way into the woods, and there's no electricity, but they want everything just so, like it is at home. And in order to pull that off, they have many people working ahead of time and while they're here for their 2 weeks. And they send 2, they call them servants. I don't really call them servants anymore because I've met them and they're just nice guys. But they come ahead of time and stay in the servants' quarters, and they get together with the people like me, the cleaning lady and the caretaker, and get the place ready. Bring the ice, it's endless, the supplies that need to be brought from, not only from this town, but from surrounding towns to get the right things that they want to have ready for when they're there. And I spent about, so long story, but there was a cleaning lady that they had forever. Their, lifetime cleaning lady who they adored, and just she was the best, and she was not doing well last summer. So I agreed to step in, but it was really, really big shoes to fill because she had done everything for them for years and knew just the right brands of cleaning supplies. And so anyway, it was a big production. The whole family knew all about these people coming, and in the time leading up to it, my kids often had to go and hang around outside while I did little tasks. And anyway, I'll speed up because the people, the 2 guys, because I never asked permission to be telling this story, I'm just going to protect their identity, and I'll call them Chet and Joe. These are the guys that came ahead of time. And they, because the people, and I'll call them George and Diana, they came 3 days driving. They had to rent, they don't fly, and they had their whole, they're staying in a hotel in Ohio, and we knew their itinerary. Everyone, even my kids, can probably say they knew ahead of time, days leading up. And in the bedroom, I happened to look up in their bedroom and I saw mold everywhere, all over, because these places are usually shut down tight with blinds drawn and closed for winter at least, if not longer. And I thought, I was new at the job, and I stood there and I looked at the mold, and I had exactly about 3 days or less before Chet and Joe showed up. And I said, well, now what kind of a cleaning lady would I be if I didn't notice mold? And I had this little debate in my head for a long time because I knew for a fact that if I brought this attention to the caretakers and everyone else involved in this big production, that it was going to mean we're going to scramble and we're going to go to Tupper Lake and get paint, and which is what ended up happening because I couldn't let it be, and it was in the walls. So we had to paint bins and put, the right color. It had to be matched perfectly. And this, anyway, we managed to pull it off, and everything went smoothly. They arrived, and we were invited, kids, husband, everyone was invited to come sit on their porch and have a iced tea and a soda and enjoy their view, because they have one of the best views sit in their chairs, which they fussed over because we were not allowed to put the chairs out too early because they didn't want people that happened to be strolling by to think that they were welcome to sit on those chairs. And this is a true story. But we got the honor to sit in those chairs and have Chet and Joe bring us little drinks with ice. Now, ice is a treat way an hour in the woods where there's no electricity. And a little cocktail napkin that had the name of their camp printed on the cocktail napkin. And we sat on the porch, and Chet and Joe brought soda with ice for the kids. And before we had gotten there, they were having a little garage sale of items that they had collected from the camp. And Joe came by and he saw the garage sale and he told the kids, if I take that silver pitcher back to George and Diana's house and polish it for you, I bet instead of 50 cents, you'd get $10 for it. So they were very interested in this, and Joe, as promised, took them back and polished it and brought it back to the garage sale. Now, we sat on the porch, we had our drinks, and then the evening went on and we went home, and in the car, like I said, these people have this gorgeous view, a huge, beautiful camp, and we were driving back to our camp, and I said, well, what did you guys think of George and Diana's house? And I don't remember which one said, I wish we had Chet and Joe.
Thank you, Jay. Very good. So, an hour into the woods. You know, sometimes you forget how deep that we are in the middle of the largest wilderness area in the lower 48, in 6 million square acres. Nothing touches it. My brother, who lives in California, I often like to point out to him because he's a big high desert hiker and backpacker, that all of those well-known parks out there could fit inside the Adirondack Park. Kind of cool. We have one more storyteller who signed up. You can be thinking about whether or not, because I don't see Hillary and Richard. Did Hillary and Richard sneak in on me? No. Okay. That's a different Hillary. We're getting to him. So if you think there's a story of work you want to share with us, work from somewhere in the Adirondacks, this neck of the woods, we can certainly get you up here on the mic. But while you're thinking, let's bring Hillary LeBlanc up. Come on, Hillary. Very close if you can.
Okay. Yeah, if you're from Long Lake, you remember me as Guy. When I went to Ballston Spa as a conservation officer, I became known as Officer LeBlanc or Hillary. And I retired March 7th, 2000, and I've been doing photographs ever since. Bessie Lamus showed up last summer with a bag full of diaries. Belonged to Merritt Lamus when he was a game protector from 1926 to 1946. They fired him, they never told him why. In 1946, he went on to become sheriff. I'm up to book 9 now. And December 18th, 1934, Merritt arrested 3 guys. One guy I knew was Harold Austin. Bunny's dad. Yes, tell Bunny. He had to pay at that time was probably a lot of money, $10.50. So the fine would have been $8. and the civil penalty would have been $2.50. But he wrote very carefully in the diaries who he arrested, how much they paid sometimes, and didn't say much else other than that. But he patrolled an area from Tupper Lake to Ticonderoga, and then he patrolled from Lake Placid all the way down to Gloversville and Old Forge. There were two other conservation officers or game protectors then, and one was named Burke in Racket Lake, the other was Farrell over in Indian Lake. There's more to go yet, so there'll be about somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 photos by the time I'm finished. But right now, I've turned in over 37,000 photos to the archives, the Historical Society. Been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot, had a lot of fun. I haven't got to the part yet where it's an old family story that somewhere in the early 40s, the Conservation Department sent some undercover guys into the Adirondacks. And during the winter, I forget which year, they got a bunch of search warrants, and they raided all these houses where the guys had been taking illegal venison. Because that was all there was to eat here, year-round. And when they got to my father's house, it used to be right across from Haas's store. Haas bought it, took it down here a few years back. But Dad was up in the attic throwing it out the attic window into the snow, and there was like pock marks all over my mother sitting in the snowbanks. They never found any until I got to my crib. It must have been about 1939, because they found where my mother had stashed what was ever in the icebox under the blankets in my crib. That's there's gonna be a list, probably of a whole lot of people. My earliest recollections, Grandpa came here in 1883, 1882 as a river driver. And the story goes that he left Glen Robinson up in Ontario. His father and mother, two sisters, married two brothers, immigrated from Alsace-Lorraine. One went out west. Grandpa's parents stayed in Glen Robinson. And apparently he had one of his brothers and he were sweet on the same girl, so they flipped the coin. The loser had to leave town. That's how Grandpa got here. He sometime, 1905, he was in the history book for Hamilton County as the barber in Long Lake, or the whole county. His barber shop was right where Stewart's store is today. I found some old pictures that took me a long time. I found him in a photo, looked just like my father, around 1904-05, at a wedding party on the front porch of the Helms and Smith Hotel, which is where Haas's store is today. That burned in 1914 or something like that. And Grandma, she used to make bread rolls once a week. This great big pan. I remember needing a flour. Make bread rolls for the whole week. And then Friday night, we all got a bath in the same pan. But I got reminded of a story by Michael Huntley. Anybody here remember Levi Boudreau? Levi used to own the rock shop. Before the rock shop, it was Huntley's Lakeside. Before that, it was Levi's. Before that, Bart Kelly built it. And after Levi sold it to Howard, he liked to tell stories, and I remember Howard telling me the story, and I've never forgotten all about it until Mike wrote me and sent out an obituary for Rita Gavin. She was a Boudreaux. She got married here at St. Henry's. But Levi Boudreaux, during World War I, was an entertainer. He sang a duet with a Frenchman. And after the war, the Frenchman went back to Paris. Well, he sent Levi a letter. He thought he should come to France. They could make a lot of money singing music. Apparently, I don't remember Levi singing. He hollered a lot. Didn't sing much. So, Mikey remembers him telling this story to his father. Then he went home and he came back a short time later with a letter. And Howard read the letter. It was postmarked from France. And telling him he should come there. They could make a lot of money in the music industry. It was signed by Maurice Chevalier. So there's a lot of history along the way. It's a country of immigrants, and we're a village of immigrants. So, time, yes.
Boy, we could listen to you all night. Thank you, Hillary. Really, I could listen to you all night. That was really just like the tip, the very, very teeniest tip, I think, of
It's a wrong setting here. We should have a bonfire to kick a beer.
We should, absolutely. I'll bring the beer, you get the fire going. It's a deal.
That's where I'm going when I leave here.
You know, actually, Amy and Claire and I have been talking about what is the most obvious place to have people tell stories to each other when you're in any rural area in a way. It's around a campfire. So we're going to work on that for next summer. Oh, that too. Oh. Claire is still recording. But it is true. We find with our other storytelling series, The How, the best locations are barrooms. You get people a little relaxed, and they get up there, and they tell those stories. It goes pretty nicely. So, is there anyone else who wants to join us at the mic right now? We have a little time. If there's a story of work someone wants to share with us? No?
I can tell a short one.
Well, come on up. Oh, this is Barbara Smetana, whose name I have said on the air years ago, some years ago. And you can, if you want, you can tell them why I said your name on the air, because you reminded me tonight.
Yes, because I escaped from prison.
Because you escaped from prison, and we were all looking for her.
Not really, not really. It was my neighbors on Lake Eaton. I came to Lake Eaton as a little girl a very little girl in 1946, and Pete Boudreaux built our camp. We came, I'm going to tell you, because I was the first employed person on Lake Eaton. Pete Boudreaux built our camp, and he lived across the street, and he had a housekeeper, Addie, and Pete had many orphans, and I never quite understood why Pete had all these orphans who lived with him, but it was not for me to ask. When Pete came down to look at our property on Lake Eaton, he said he could put a house up. He was slightly deaf, and he could put a house up, no problem. And by Thanksgiving of that year, the Boffs and my father's family, we had Thanksgiving in our little houses on Lake Eaton. But my job would be for 10 more years, I was the first water system on Lake Eaton, because whenever there was water that needed to come up from the lake, they always looked at me and said, Barbara Ann, we need a bucket of water. I never worked here, but I've come here and had fun for my whole life. Okay, thank you.
So Barbara, I don't live inside the Blue Line. I live actually north of the Blue Line. The radio station's primary studios are based in Canton in St. Lawrence County, and I live about 20 miles west of that on a farm, which I moved to in 1971. And there was a house, there was a barn, there was 120 acres, that I moved to from Broadway and 111th Street in Manhattan. And so it didn't have running water, so it didn't have a bathroom. So, you know, I was young, I was game, and I carried buckets of water for 10 years. We had horses, we had a cow, we had sheep, you know, it was a lot, and I was the water carrier. So there you go. Anyone else want to join us at the microphone tonight? Come on up.
My name is Rebecca. Hi, everyone. I am a trail builder and trail crew leader here in the Adirondacks.
Woo!
And I find that a lot of people kind of don't know what that looks like day to day, so I thought I'd tell you about one very cool project that we had last summer in the Adirondacks, which was rebuilding the Hitch-Up Matilda Bridges and the Avalanche Pass.
Wow.
So for a little context, I work just down the road at the Adirondack Corps. We're based out of the William C. Whitney Wilderness area. And every summer we hire 18 young folks from across the country, and they come up to the Adirondacks, most of them for the first time. And we train them in basically how to build trails, carpentry, conservation techniques, and then they complete conservation projects throughout the park for the summer. So last year, one of our projects was rebuilding the Hitch-Up Matilda Bridges. For anybody who's not familiar with the Hitch-Up Matildas, the trail along Avalanche Lake is really narrow and rocky, and there's a few spots where the lake butts right up against the cliff face. So no spot for a trail. There's some bridges that are basically suspended over the water, a timber structure on some threaded steel rods into the cliff face there. This project was kind of a trail builder's dream. We do a lot of digging tread, we do a lot of clearing trail, we work all over the park, like I said, but the High Peaks is so awesome, and to be working right between Mount Marcy and Mount Algonquin is a dream project, so really cool to be up there. So this project was challenging and unique in a lot of ways that I'll get into in a few minutes, but was really excited to head up there and take a crew up there. So first day, we're at the trailhead, South Meadows, we're loading up our packs. We'll be out there for 10 days rebuilding those bridges. And basically, since we'll be out there for 10 days, we carry in everything that we need for those 10 days on our backs. So that looks like gear, our tents, our sleeping bags, our sleeping pads, food to feed a hungry trail crew for 10 days, and our tools as well. The High Peaks is a wilderness area, so what that means for a trail builder is no mechanized tools, no power drills, no chainsaws. So we're going to be drilling everything by hand, cutting everything by hand as well. So we load up, everybody's got probably a 70, 80 pound pack on their backs to head up to Avalanche Lake, and even for someone who's doing trail work all summer, that's a pretty heavy load up that trail. So we head up, and as we're hiking up, you know, the crews come every year, it's a new crew, and they're learning throughout the summer, so I'm checking in with them as we're heading up there. Like, you guys got a heavy load, this is a hard hike, how you doing? We're fine, they say, like, we're fine. We're halfway there, how are you guys doing? We're fine. So we get up to Avalanche Lake, and that trail is so narrow and rocky, you basically gotta be a mountain goat to get across it, but it's hard to be a mountain goat when you got 80 pounds on your back. How you guys doing? We're almost there. Fine. We make it to camp at 8 p.m., set up camp, and we got 10 days of work ahead of us. Day 2, we're tearing down the old structure, just the old timbers, rusty nails poking out everywhere. That structure was built, I believe, in the 1970s. Hauling all the old lumber to the end of the lake where it'll be picked up by a helicopter. We're hauling new lumber across the lake in the DEC rowboats. And to build the new structure, and we're making cuts by hand, we're drilling by hand. Day 5, the structure's starting to come together. Each of the basic timber supports has to be shaped to fit onto the round steel anchors that are bolted into the cliff face. So chiseling by hand, gouging by hand, testing everything out in a rowboat on the lake. And then the timber supports will be attached to the steel anchors with U-bolts that are threaded up from underneath. Now normally a U-bolt, you would just tap that on or push it in. These U-bolts fit really snugly, so that looks like standing in a rocking rowboat, hammering upwards with all your might. The boat is rocking. Your crewmate is desperately anchoring you to the cliff face. The hammer is ringing, ear-splitting off the cliff face next to you and across Avalanche Lake. We get the structure in. Day 9. The structure is just about together. We're pounding in the last few nails. We've been working until 6, 7, 8 p.m. to get this done every night. And a huge storm is rolling in, so we're trying to get the last pieces nailed on before the lightning comes. It's not safe to be out there when it's lightning. So we nail the last few things in. There's thunder crashing around us. It starts pouring rain. The lake is like roiling. The rowboats are getting swept out onto the lake. And there are white caps on Avalanche Lake. We get the bridge done. I look over, my crew who's worked so hard the past 10 days are huddled under this rock overhang where we've been caching our tools. And I go over and I say, guys, are you okay? You know, they've worked so incredibly hard in this beautiful spot. Are you guys okay? They're shivering. You're really cold. And they say, we're fine. Thank you.
Steep Adirondack trails, you had rocking boats, you had lightning, you had, I mean, you really packed that one in. That was great. Thank you so much. I guess we bring this evening to a conclusion. Thank you so much. I urge all of you to visit ncpr.org/work. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It was great having you here. Big, huge thanks to Christine LaRock, who's really made all our work here possible. Thank you so much.